The June 2023 update on the performance of my solar array. So this was a cracking month, so let's get straight into it. First of all, the disclaimer, please pause and read. I'm not an expert, I'm just sharing what I know, and there might be some mistakes in what I say. Okay, so before I get into all these numbers on the screen, let me touch on the voltage problem that I was having a few months ago. I haven't been sharing the metrics because it's very painful to pull them all together. I have to download each day's data one by one, copy paste, etc. But I haven't been noticing that the system has been having a problem. None of the apps are reporting that it's tripping out, so it must be working. When I have some time, I will download all the data again and do an update. But that's why I haven't spoken about that recently. The chap from the grid, I haven't heard from him either. So he seems to have managed to solve the problem temporarily for now, or whatever he's done. Even if we're having a few spikes outside of the legal limits, it doesn't seem to be causing a problem. Okay, so getting into the metrics. Lifetime, our system has produced 9,966 kilowatt hours. So that's in just over a year and a half's worth of production. This year, 2023, we have produced 3,782 kilowatt hours. Compared to the same time last year, we'd only produced 3,253, so we are up 529 kilowatts or 16%. Keep in mind we have 4 extra solar panels facing south, so a chunk of this is coming from that. And I still believe that last year was a sunnier year compared to this year, so I think this growth is mostly attributed to the extra panels. Electricity import, this year we have imported 3,355 kilowatt hours compared to 942 last year. So that's a whopping increase of 2,413 or 256%. And the reason for that is last year we were barely using the car and we were charging it from the public network because we had some free credit. This year that's expired, so we're charging the car from home and drawing it from the grid in the winter months because we don't have enough solar power. So that's why this number is dramatically higher. Looking at the gas, this year we have consumed 17,758 kilowatt hours of gas. Same time last year we had consumed 18,271, so we are down by 514 kilowatts or 2.8%. So this is good, and I will talk a little bit about why we're down a little bit and what's going on in a moment. CapEx has remained the same. And OPEX, this year we have saved £2,881.48 compared to £942.76 last year. So that's a whopping increase of £1,938.72 or 206%. So this is largely because we are driving the electric car, and that's saving us a lot of money on diesel. We have 4 extra solar panels. We have an extra battery so we can store the power rather than exporting it. And we have the eddy hooked up to 2 immersion heaters. So compared to last year, the system is getting pretty optimized, and so I'm able to eke out as much of a saving as possible. Okay, so looking at our performance for the month of June, the headline here is we produced 1.1 megawatt hours of solar power, right? That's 1,150 kilowatt hours produced. We imported 146.1 kilowatt hours and we exported 173. So we were net exporters in the month of June. Looking at the graph, the aim of the game is not to have any grey on this chart. So you can see above the line, above the zero line, the blue mostly engulfs the grey bars. We barely have any grey, only tiny slivers, which is normal, which means our day's power consumption was met mostly by, or if not all, by solar power. The few days over here where you do see a bit of grey, this is because we had to charge the car from the grid overnight because we had a long journey or something to do. You also see on the bottom here we have chunks of grey, and this is us exporting power back to the grid because the car's charged or it's not plugged in, the battery's full, the hot water's done, there's nowhere else for the electricity to go, so it ends up going back to the grid. So this is a really good month. It's a record for us. It's the most we've ever made, partly due to having 4 extra panels. I wouldn't say June. I mean, it's been sunny in June, but it's not the sunniest month. I still think last year we had sunnier days, but it's cracking progress. Overall, we only depended on the grid for 13% of our electricity, and the bulk of that number was because of the car that needed charging. If you took the car out of the equation, we'd get this grid dependence number down to probably 5% or maybe even less than that. Having a look at the array, you can see that each panel is pulling its weight almost equally, with the exception of the couple which are affected by shading from the neighbour's dormer. So this is really, really good. And surprisingly, the east array on the front of the house is producing a comparable amount to the south array on our summer house. Looking at best and worst days, the best day was the 13th of June. So we have a really nice kind of curve here, almost as perfect as it's going to get. Overnight, we had enough power in the battery to meet our overnight demand and meet our hot water demand. So you can see that we basically pulled nothing from the grid overnight. It's almost perfect. Then from about 5 a.m. when the sun peaks up, we've got a nice curve. It was a nice, clear, perfectly blue day. You can see in the afternoon the odd cloud appeared up, so it's not as smooth on the way down. And this weird kind of section here is because the panels on our summer house, there's a couple of trees which get shading, so as the sun pokes through the trees, it picks up a bit more power and whatever. And then you see over here where, it's dinner time, so the oven's on and whatever, and we're pulling more than 3 kilowatts, so the battery can't meet the demand, and then we end up with a tiny bit coming from the grid. But overall, this is really good and almost as perfect a bell curve as we're ever going to see. Our worst day then was the 28th of June. We only produced 16 kilowatt hours, which is still really, really good. It's a really good day. In a winter month, we wouldn't get anywhere near 16. And same story again, the battery had enough charge left over to meet the hot water demand, so that was free, and we didn't put anything from the grid overnight. And the battery was full again in the evening, so again we didn't put anything for the rest of that evening. Okay, moving on. So household electricity consumption. Looking at the bar on the far right. First of all, there is no blue segment this month. That means all of the regular consumption from our house, so like the fridge, the freezer, the kettle, the TV, the Wi-Fi, all that kind of stuff, was 100% serviced by solar power, free solar power. Okay, we didn't have to pull anything from the grid for our day-to-day usage. So our house, just to kind of run it on standby and do a bit of cooking and whatever, used 571 kilowatts, and that all came from solar power. And then the car, we've put a tiny amount of power into the car peak time, we've put 95 kilowatts into the car off peak, and we've put 252 kilowatt hours into the car from free solar power. Looking at the green segments, we have put a little bit of power into the eddy from off peak, and we have put 148 kilowatts into the eddy from free solar power. Now, if you looked at the previous month, the number's down a bit, and let me explain why. From the beginning of June, roughly, our water tank has corroded and it's leaking. Basically, it wasn't enabling water to warm up. It also meant that the immersion heater was tripping out, saying that the water's warm, because I don't think it's surrounded by any water. So it's getting hot within a few seconds, and the thermostat's closing. So for basically a month now, we've got a problem where one water tank is not being warmed by the immersion heater, and we are having to use gas to heat that water tank. So that's why the eddy is only kind of doing half as much work as it ought to be. So the engineer's been out, said we need a replacement tank, so that's getting fitted in the next few days. But that's the reason why we're not pumping as much power into the eddy as you might expect. And that's why our solar export is particularly high, because some of this would have otherwise ended up going to the second immersion heater. So then, of course, the export is 179 kilowatts, so this is significantly more than normal. And again, during this month, we haven't had a full house. So for about 3/4 of the month, I've switched off the boiler completely to the main portion of the house, and all of the hot water demand is being met by the eddy. But then in the second portion of the house, the eddy can't do any work, so the hot water demand is being met by gas. So overall, we're down on our consumption a little bit because there's not many people in the house. But at the same time, I've been able to switch off the boiler and meet all of the hot water demand from solar power. So looking at gas, so the good news is our gas consumption has come down, and it's also come down significantly lower than the same time last year. Like I said, I've turned off the boiler, so you can see the blue segment is next to nothing. So for the first 10 days we were using the boiler, but after that I've switched it off. So you can see we're hardly putting anything. And the red segment is a little bit bigger than last year, and again that's because the eddy's not working, so they're having to use a bit more gas to heat the hot water. But the good news is we're significantly down on gas consumption, which is a good thing. Okay, if I talk about the Octopus bill, so for the electricity that we imported, the 146 kilowatts or whatever it was, in the month of June we got charged £27.75, and if I remember correctly, 130 kilowatts of that was off-peak, and about 14 kilowatts of that was peak time. Right, so we really managed to optimize this. Gas, the main portion of our house consumed £26 worth of gas. Like I say, that's mostly the standing charge and the first 10 days when we were heating the hot water and doing some cooking. The other portion of our house has cost us £46 worth of gas, and that is because we have the standing charge and then the eddy's not working, so we're using gas to heat all the hot water. And then for those 179 kilowatt hours that we exported back to the grid, Octopus has paid us about £7.34. And it's broken in two parts because my Octopus export tariff expired. My 1 year anniversary was on the 12th of June. So although the price hasn't changed, they seem to have broken the statement into two parts. But the unit price is the same. Also, last month, I have attempted to switch to Scottish Power. Scottish Power are paying about 12 point something pence for electricity export, versus Octopus, who are only offering 4.1 pence. So I've attempted to switch to Scottish, but it's not as easy as, when you switch your main gas and electricity supply. For export, they're still, in the Jurassic period, and it takes forever, and you've got no clue what's going on, all those kind of things. They also have a weird requirement where you have to have quit your SEG tariff with your current supplier and currently have no kind of export connection for them to consider you to switch to their export. So I don't really agree with this principle. I think they need to do their paperwork, and when they're ready to switch, I'll then quit Octopus and they can take over from the next day. But why would I want to quit Octopus while my paperwork is sat in their queue? So we'll see what happens. But anyway, I submitted that about 2 weeks ago, and who knows how long it's going to take. I mean, it took Octopus about 3 months to get my SEG tariff activated. Scottish say that they will backdate what they pay you based on the day of your application, because they asked me for a photograph of the meter showing the export reading. So let's see what happens. Okay. So referrals, those of you who are coming to the end of your tariff or want to switch onto a smart tariff, if you want to switch to Octopus, you can use the code on the screen, and both you and I will receive a £50 credit from Octopus in our first bill as a thank you from them. So I'll put the link in the comments, you can copy paste it, or alternatively, if you end up calling them, just quote SoftJewel489 and you will also get the credit. Okay. I would really encourage you to switch to Octopus just for a couple of reasons. One is all of their energy is sourced from green resources. And second of all, they have a whole variety of smart tariffs. So whether you have just solar power, a battery, a car, or any combination of it, they have a tariff which works quite intelligently for you. So as I said, I switched to Octopus Intelligent a couple of months ago. And this gives me a 6-hour off-peak window rather than Octopus Go, which only gave 4 hours. So it's much more helpful in terms of charging the car. But it also means any other demand in my house during those 6 hours is also charged at the off-peak rate rather than the peak rate. And the intelligent part about it is I tell the app that I need my car charged to 80% or 100% by 3 o'clock in the morning. And then Octopus figures out, okay, your current charge is 12%, so in order to get you to 80% by 3 o'clock in the morning, I have to start charging right now. Or I can afford to wait 2 hours, but then I have to start charging. So if Octopus determines that the only way to get your car charged to the level that you asked for, by whatever time you asked for, is to charge your car at peak time, Octopus will start charging your car at peak time, but it will only charge you the off-peak rate. So not only is the electricity which ends up going in your car charged at the off-peak rate, but all of the electricity that your house is consuming also then gets charged at the off-peak rate. So it's a little trick. So those of you who have a battery similar to me, you could trick the system into charging your car, even if you don't need it, just to say that you need it to be at 100% in 20 minutes, which might be unachievable. So Octopus will start charging your car and your entire house's rate gets reduced to 7 point something pence. And that means that your oven and your kettle and everything at peak time is actually being charged at the off-peak rate. So it's a little trick, and you can also charge your battery that way if you needed to, if you've got one. So something to consider, that's Intelligent Octopus, but as I say, they have loads of smart tariffs, Agile Octopus and various other ones, so it's certainly worth considering. Okay, this is the chart from My Energy, so you can see what I said, that for the first 10 days there's this kind of grey colour and green colour where we are putting energy into both the immersion heaters, but from the 10th of June one of the immersion heaters has stopped working because the tank is leaking, so you can see that I'm only putting power into the other immersion heater in the main portion of our house. So that's why it's a bit less. The other thing is that seeing as the tank broke, I asked the plumber to install a pump on the main tank because we were getting stratification. So my main tank has a top mounted immersion heater, and what was happening is that it's heating the water, but it's only heating the top part of the tank, but the bottom part remains cold because heat rises, so the water at the top gets hot, and therefore the thermostat for the immersion heater says, okay, I'm at temperature, and stops, even though all the water at the bottom of the tank is cold. So what we need to do is circulate the water and mix it together a little bit, but there's no way of doing that. Other tanks, more modern tanks, they usually have an immersion heater mounted low down in the tank, so you don't have this problem. But the particular tank we've got has got a top mounted immersion heater. So seeing as the plumber was coming here to fix the other tank, I asked him, look, can you drain down the system and fit in a destratification pump? Because last year the thermostat was broken, so that the eddy would just keep on boiling the water in that tank and it would never stop. So when we got that fixed, the new problem is now it's stopping before all the water's hot enough. So the solution is either we get a new tank or we fit a destratification pump. So I asked him to do that. And his quote was like £600. So I decided we're not going to waste £600 because I won't see the payback on it. So instead, what I've tried to do based on some reviews is I've reduced the rate at which the eddy works. So instead of being able to warm the water at 3 kilowatts, I've reduced it down to 1.5. And based on other people's feedback, this will reduce the amount of stratification happening. So it means it takes longer to heat the hot water in both tanks because it's one setting which controls both immersion heaters, but it should allow more energy to go into there, and it should warm up more of the water. So let's see what happens, but that's what I've done. Instead of paying £600 for the labour and VAT and whatever, I decided it's just not worth it. I mean, I can call another handyman person I know who's good at plumbing and get it done cheaper, but it's just not worth the costs. I think I'm going to see how I go with reducing the rate of heating. Okay, moving on to the installer estimate. So this is some really good metrics here. We have surpassed the year 2 target, which was to produce 9,832 kilowatt hours by the end of 2023 or November 2023. And in June we have hit it. We have generated 9,966 kilowatt hours, which is otherwise 101% of target. So fantastic news. We already hit the year 2 consumption estimate ages ago. We did it like last year. They expected us to consume half of what we produced, so we needed to consume 4,916, and it looks like we hit that in August 2022. So we are way past the consumption estimate here. In terms of how much we consumed, so in the month of June, we only consumed 84% of what we made. So even though we made a record amount, as you can see here, we weren't able to consume more of it compared to the previous month. We've basically consumed the same. And the reason is that we exported all this power because, one, our second immersion heater is not working, so I can't divert some of it into there. And second, we were using the car, so even though the car needed charging, it wasn't here to be plugged in during the day to receive all this extra solar power. So it's an interesting way of looking at this. It's good, but it's we still have power that we could otherwise be using that we ended up giving back to the grid. But there's not much I can do unless I get a second electric car which can charge up at the same time. Okay, so let's go through the data. Here are all the numbers. So we're looking at the column on the right hand side, June 2023. So our system produced 1.15 megawatt hours, or 1,150 kilowatt hours. We exported 179 kilowatt hours. The total solar consumption was 971. Of that, 570 went towards servicing our day-to-day house demand, 148 went into the eddy, and 252 went into the car. We imported 140 kilowatt hours from the grid of electricity, and we imported 554 kilowatt hours of gas. Capex has remained the same. The unit prices for the month of June have remained the same, but we've already had notification from Octopus that from the 1st of July onwards, our rates are dropping by 17%. Keep in mind, this is the unit price, not the standing charge. Surprisingly, the standing charge is going up to a ridiculous amount. So we should see some adjustments from next month. So with all the solar power going into the house, it has saved us £237 worth of electricity. Octopus Go has cost us £1.44. I'll have to have a look at why that's not right. The eddy, diverting into the eddy, has saved us £15.11. You can see that it's less than the previous month when you would expect it to be more. So as I said, it's because our immersion's not working. And we only pulled a few kilowatts of off-peak electricity to put into the eddy. And so it's only saved us £1 because we have so much peak time available. I've switched off the timer to do the water overnight based on the off-peak rate. I set it to, I haven't switched off the timer, but it's all being serviced by the battery. The battery has enough charge left over that we don't end up pulling anything from the grid. And because I've reduced the rate of charge down to 1.5 kilowatts, it means that our battery can meet that and meet the kind of 600-700 kilowatts that our house uses on standby, all from battery power. Okay, and then as I said before, we've saved £7.34 by exporting our electricity to the grid. So producing 179 kilowatts is a big deal. It takes a lot of time and energy, and all Octopus gave us was £7.34. So I keep on underlining my point that if your game plan is to get solar power and export all this energy back to the grid, you are not going to make much money. It's going to take you forever. That should be a last resort, and you should try and configure your system to consume as much as possible. If you can hear the background noise, I'm sorry, there's a thunderstorm outside, and it's tipping it down with the rain. It's quite noisy. Okay, looking at the electric car, so using solar power to go into the car has saved us £25 worth of diesel. Peak time electricity has cost us £4.17. Off-peak electricity has cost us £7, and the public charging point cost us £3.63. We saved £302 worth of diesel in the month of June because of all the driving that we were doing. It would have cost us that much, and therefore overall having an electric car has saved us £313 for that month. So the grand total of savings for the month of June then is £572.81, making our cumulative saving £5,694. So that's from a starting balance of about £24,000. We have paid off £5,600, so we have a balance of £17,796 to recover before we break even. We've paid off 32% of our system, and that means we have 6 years, 9 months and 1 day to go until we are forecasted to break even. And our energy independence for the month of June was 87%. So this is the inverse metric to the energy dependence that we saw earlier on, which was 13%. So overall, this is really good. We have put a lot of money in the piggy bank. We continue to bring that payback period down. If you remember, I've always said payback would be between 7 and 11 years, and it looks like we're starting to slow down the rate of how many months we're lopping off. So I think about 7 years seems to feel about right. So we're already a year and a half in. So in about 5.5 years' time from now, so basically 2028 Christmas, we should have broken even on this system, and everything after that is free. Okay, and finally the payback curve. So the blue line, or the teal coloured line near the top, is our capital expenditure. You can see that for coming up to a year we haven't spent any money, and all these lines are the OPEX savings. So this green line is the grand total. The aim of the game is to get this green line to catch up with the blue line. So you can see in the time that I've had the system, we're approaching saving £6,000, and we need to get up to this £24,000 number. Right? So we still have a way to go, but hopefully you can start to see that everything I've done, the curve is starting to point up, more parabolic, steeper. So we should be catching this up before long. All right, and I think that is it for the month of June. So to summarise, we've had a record month, our best production day ever, our best month ever. We have had a problem with our hot water in one of the tanks, so we haven't been able to use as much of this free electricity as we would have liked. And the tariff is changing from next month. I've tried to switch to Scottish Power, not sure if it's going to work and when it's going to happen. But then for the export, I can earn 3 times as much as Octopus are giving me. I'm surprised why Octopus haven't changed their export tariff. They're normally quite competitive, but hey ho, you can switch your export to a different company from your import. It doesn't have to be the same. There's no connection there, so that's what I'm going to try and do. Well, I think that's it for now. Catch you next month in the next update.